Resident Evil Afterlife.
So Resident Evil Afterlife tells the story of Alice and a group of survivors as they try to gain access to a supposed sanctuary. Welcome back to the Resident Evil review series, everybody, and we are now on chapter 4 of this franchise, which is Resident Evil Afterlife. If you're a fan of this franchise and have not followed me yet, I've already done full reviews of the first 3 films. If you want to check those out, pause this video, go watch all 3 of those on that playlist, and then come back and catch up with Resident Evil Afterlife. We're going to be doing the next 2 films in this franchise over the next 2 days. And then on Wednesday, you'll have my review of the hopefully awesome Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. I'm seeing a lot of very positive early responses on Twitter, which is surprising pleasantly for me, so very looking forward to that one. And then of course we're going to end on a ranking once that new film is out. So if you're a Resident Evil fan, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I've also done a lot of reviews and rankings of the video games, so plenty of Resident Evil content on this channel if you are a fan. Now, as far as Resident Evil Afterlife, this is again another movie of this franchise that I saw in theaters. It seems like I did every other one. I saw Apocalypse in theaters, I saw Afterlife, and then I saw Final Chapter, which was one of the earlier reviews, like in the first year of this channel. And when this movie came out, I was a huge fan of Resident Evil 5. Me and my little brother Dylan had played the living hell out of that game. I loved the co-op, and we both just became big Resident Evil video game fans. And so when we went to go see this and saw in the trailer that they were doing some elements of Resident Evil 5, we were very excited. And this was also in 3D. There was a bunch of advertisement like, this is filmed with the cameras that James Cameron used in Avatar, as if that meant that there was a quality match between those 2 movies. But I remember that being a big deal that they were pushing in the advertisement of this movie. So we went to go see it, went to see it in 3D, and for our theater viewing, we both really enjoyed this movie. And it has been a movie that, like most of the films in this franchise, not all of them, but most of them, I still continue to have a lot of guilty pleasure with, but there's a lot of problems with Resident Evil Afterlife. So let's get into it. Starting off with the positives for Resident Evil Afterlife, like the last 3 movies, there is some enjoyable action here. These are movies you don't really go to for the horror, which is kind of the ultimate problem with these movies, aside from the respect that they refuse to pay to the source material. But for action, for zombie action, for monster action, for giant Resident Evil style, almost kaiju level monster action, this yet again is another movie that is very surface level entertaining. If you want to go just to watch Alice kick the living shit out of umbrella projects and zombies, this movie delivers just like the first 3 did. There's a lot more like Matrix style fighting in here, where you have the whole sequence in the beginning that's very exciting with all of the Alice clones, the direction that they teased at the end of the 3rd movie, making this siege on Umbrella. It's a very cool opening sequence, and it was very cool to watch in 3D. You have multiple fight scenes here, one of which is pretty entertaining with the giant Axeman from Resident Evil 5. And there's a lot of zombie action in here as well that kind of takes a little bit more of like a Dawn of the Dead remake approach, where they're in this bunker, they have these tight hallways, and zombies are making it out, and they're up on the rooftop and see all the undead. This franchise has never been original. They always kind of take some direct elements from Romero films, or even the remakes of Romero films at this point. But for what they do here, for entertainment value of an action horror sequel to the 3 films we've gotten beforehand, they pretty much nail the same elements that they've nailed before regarding the action. I'm actually somebody that I like Sean Roberts' version of Wesker. I don't think that he is perfect. There's certainly a much better version of that character that we can get, and hopefully we're going to get them here in a couple of days. But for the tone that these movies have been going for that goofy B-movie action, over-the-top, chewing the scenery type character that the Wesker, their version is, I think that he does a very entertaining job with it. He's certainly better than the stand-in guy that they got that's in a couple of scenes and boardroom meetings in the previous film. Here, I think that the action sequences that he is in is fun. There's a lot of direct callbacks to Resident Evil 5. I think that his interaction dialogue-wise with Alice is fun. I'm somebody that I could totally understand why somebody would look at this character and be like, this is fucking cheesy as hell, and you are absolutely right. But for me, I think it works for the movie that they're going for, and I appreciate him being the main villain of this movie. I also like Wentworth Miller as Chris Redfield. Again, we'll get into it. They don't exactly prop Chris Redfield up to be arguably the star of the video game franchise. Is between him and Leon. You don't really get that feeling from his character and the way he's utilized in this movie, and certainly after this movie, we'll talk about that as well. But for what we do get here, I do like Wentworth Miller's performance as Chris. I think he's got the attitude, he's got that kind of stoic mystery about him. I've always liked Wentworth Miller as an actor anyway, especially from Prison Break. So I like the flavor that he brings to this. He's one of the certainly least offensive portrayals of the video game characters. And I also like the fact that we get Claire back and we get the two Redfields together, because aside from Code Veronica, unless there's a side story that I did not play, that's the only time we ever actually got to see those two characters interact. So getting to see that on the movie screen as a fan of the games and as a big fan of those two characters, I enjoyed that part. And my final positive is that this movie does take a lot of things from Resident Evil 5, which is a game that I am a fan of and am a defender of. It's not as timeless as something like Resident Evil 4 or certainly some of the original games, but this was one of the most fun chapters in the Resident Evil franchise for me to play with my brother, and so many things are taken from this, from the little scarab thing that is taking over everybody that they use in the post-credit scene with Jill Valentine, just the way that Jill Valentine looks. You have the whole Axeman, you have the Las Plagas, which that honestly is like a mixed thing for me, because as much as I like the look of it and as much as it's cool to see something from Resident Evil 5, they don't explain it at all. So maybe that one's at the bottom of the list, but there's so many visual cues and so many elements taken directly from Resident Evil 5, which was only a year old when this movie came out, that the Resident Evil fan inside of me, that when I saw this was like screaming like a little girl, because I love whenever they bring something directly from the game into here. And the more that they can do that in this franchise, it does help them out. Now, as far as the negatives of this movie, the story takes a giant shit in this film. As much as I enjoy it very guiltily, I acknowledge that this has no story whatsoever. I mean, you have the beginning of this film that starts to ramp things up, and then essentially the rest of the movie is Alice getting back together with some of these survivors, meeting a couple other survivors that we don't really give much of a shit about, and for an hour plus they're like, hey, we need to get on that ship over there because there's some sanctuary, we need to do that, and the whole movie is just about them finding a way to get everybody onto that ship. So it really doesn't feel like a significant story chapter in this 6-film little saga here. It almost feels like a more egregious version of what I thought Extinction was, which is a stepping stone movie. This movie only exists to capitalize somewhat on what they teased at the end of Extinction and then set up what is going to happen in the 5th film, Retribution. But beyond that, they're kind of just Resident Evil characters doing Resident Evil shit. And that's a shame, because not that these movies ever could be accused of having great story, but the story itself was decent enough for the past couple of movies, or the little bit of an arc that we get for Alice or certain characters, to where there is something beyond the surface level action zombie stuff. This movie does not have that. It's just the surface level entertainment. Although I enjoy the sequence itself for what it is, I think it's a gigantic waste that Alice and all, 100 of her clones that was set up very cool at the end of the 3rd film is just one sequence here. They kill all of the clones and just leave Alice Prime in the first 10 minutes of the movie. To me, that was a cool direction they could have done a lot with, and it just seems like they set us up just to kind of retcon that storyline. I don't know if Paul W.S. Anderson didn't want to go through with it. I mean, he wrote all of these movies, so there's really no excuse why this, as well as something that I'm going to have to bitch about in Retribution, feels like he sets an idea up and then changes his mind and wants to do something else, because that was a really cool setup and doesn't really get realized in the way that I think all of us fans wanted it to be. I also hate the story direction that they take, to where in the opening of the film, Wesker injects Alice with this serum that neutralizes the T virus inside of her, rendering her human, just for the movie to do absolutely nothing with that. Even to the point where the action sequences, she's still fucking superhuman. I don't care what you say. He says literally, you'd have lost all your speed and your strength and your ability to heal. Doesn't make a fucking difference. She's not really injured much in this movie. She's still jumping up 18 feet in the air and doing karate kicks onto big Axemen monsters. She is flipping around like the fucking Matrix. I mean, there was nothing changed about her character from that plot element, and they could have done something with that to raise the stakes, to give her character more mortality, to do something to prop up the other characters as being just as integral to the action as Alice, but it's not that way at all. If Chris Redfield and Claire Redfield were not in this third act, I think we would still have the same exact resolution where Alice, as a human, kicks everybody's ass, including superhuman Wesker. And finally, despite the fact that I do enjoy the action for what it is, there is way too much slow-mo in this movie. This is like on the level of Mission Impossible 2, to where if you sped up all of the slow-mo scenes in this movie might be an hour long. I mean, it's just so many times for unnecessary reasons too. Like if you're doing the thing where the axe comes and they're sliding underneath it, like that's a cool shot to have in slow-mo and it makes sense. But there's so many times where like Claire's running from the Axeman and it does a slow-mo thing. Why? Why are you extending that out? That's more intense if it's in real time. Beyond that, there's also some funky wire work here, especially in the first act of the film, in the whole Matrix-like opening with all the clones. There's so many times where you see somebody jump up in midair and then are clearly suspended by some kind of a cable that has been removed and doing like horizontal spins and shit with no gravity effects on them whatsoever. So if you're gonna do wire work and everything like that, especially trying to mimic something as iconic and as pristine as Matrix for their action sequences, you better do a better job. So overall, guys, like the past three movies, I do have a lot of guilty pleasure with this movie. I can still throw it on, have a good time. I enjoyed the hell out of it when I saw it in theaters, but it is absolutely a movie that I could understand anybody telling me is a giant piece of shit, because you're not wrong. There's a lot of problems with the story here. The effects work and some of the fight choreography could really use some touching up, and I still wish that they would pay more respect to the video games aside from just cherry picking names and elements. But nonetheless, for what this movie is trying to give me, I have an okay time with it, and I will continue to have an okay time with it. So if you've enjoyed the three movies so far, this pretty much continues on with most of the strengths and most of the weaknesses of the franchise, so you'll probably enjoy this one too. But again, if you're a fan of the video games and want something that's a respectful adaptation, this is not the movie for you. So check it out online and stream it. So what do you guys think of Resident Evil Afterlife? Are you a fan of this chapter? Do you think it is a giant piece of shit? Do you like the Resident Evil 5 elements, or is that one of your least favorite games and it actually makes the movie worse that it puts all that in there? What do you think about Sean Roberts as Wesker? That seems to be a big divisive thing as well. Let me know down below all your thoughts, guys. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you are a fan of Resident Evil, because we're going to be talking about Retribution in the final chapter next, and then hopefully a glowing review for Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. Thank you guys for watching, as always, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.